Order. Good morning and welcome to the Energy Security and Net Zero Committee session on domestic energy bills. We have two panels this morning, now and just at 11 a.m. as well. Both panels of three, and I will ask this first panel to introduce themselves as they choose. Name, rank and serial number, starting on my left.
Simon Francis, Co-ordinator of the End Fuel Poverty Coalition.
Thank you very much.
Chris Norbury, Chief Executive, E.ON UK.
See you. Thank you.
Abigail Ward, Policy Manager, Energy Saving Trust.
Excellent. Thank you all for coming this morning. Just to kick off, do you think the government and Ofgem are clear on how to ensure standing charges might remain fair for both electricity and gas? And we've had sessions where we've mentioned these in the past, particularly with the Minister, Lord Callaghan. Who'd like to kick off on that? Simon, your gestures are
my gesture was
more definite.
I think obviously there's quite a lot goes into the standing charges at the moment that we feel could come out of standing charges, and also that the elements in that could be reviewed. Obviously, one of the things at the moment we're seeing is a lot going on standing charges around the 1.3 billion we're paying to help energy firms administer bad debt. And one thing that we'd like to really highlight is new research from the Warmest Winter campaign that has shown the impact of that bad debt is that almost 1 in 5 households in energy debt have turned to illegal money lenders in the last 12 months. Among younger households, this rises to a quarter turning to illegal money lending, and that means for them potentially a lifetime at the mercy of loan sharks. So what we want to see is certainly more support for people in energy debt. If we're going to be paying a lot of money to support the administer of
I mean, how much of that would you say is down to the unfairness of standing charges? How does that feed into what you're talking about there?
Well, so clearly, I mean, the problem being that even if you're on, so amongst prepayment meter users, that percentage increase is higher. So 35% of prepayment meters users in energy debt turn to illegal money lenders. So, and they're obviously in most cases paying a standing charge, even if they're not using any energy at all. So that is absolutely part of that. For those who are obviously in other areas, less so. But we do think there's obviously ways that those standing charges should be reformed and brought down because they are unfair in many cases.
Okay, anybody else want to contribute that?
Yeah, I'd agree that we agree that standing charges are too high, and I think it looking at the bigger picture, it feeds into the affordability issue at large of energy bills, and we would call for the government to follow through with its commitment in the Autumn Statement in 2022 to review the affordability of energy bills, because obviously standing charges are a large part of this, but there's also other bits at play here.
Are there any elements in the standing charge that you think shouldn't be there in the electricity standing charge?
So we don't have a firm view on what should be kind of in and out of the standing charge. As I said, we wanted the government to come forward with an affordability consultation so that this can be kind of discussed and agreed upon within industry between Ofgem and the government. So we're quite disappointed this still hasn't been brought forward, because obviously lots of respected organisations such as Citizens Advice and the New Economics Foundation have put forward great proposals of how standing charges can be reformed, but we need the government to step in now and for us to have this conversation.
It's not about E.ON. I mean, what elements in the standing charge that you'd like to see changed or reformed or removed?
We'd be open to reform of the standing charge, but I think the point that Abigail and Simon make is really important, which is we should only do that, and we should only consider that as part of a wider review of affordability. Because the risk that we run is if, for example, we move elements of the standing charge off the standing charge and onto the unit rate, then we could inadvertently disproportionately negatively affect those customers that we're trying to help. For example, a customer who has medical care dialysis at home will have a high level of energy usage. Moving those costs onto the unit rate will disproportionately affect that customer in that example. Therefore, we would be open to reform of the standing charge, but only in conjunction with the implementation of some form of targeted support for those customers who need it most.
Thank you. Just, Abigail, do you want to come in briefly?
I was muttering, Chair. Yeah, no, I agree with your final point, but I mean, moving to a rising block tariff, avoiding standing charges in the first place, and then making sure that the people that you've just identified, who are the exception, receive the support that they need that comes with their disability or whatever else it is.
You can be very brief for Lloyd or someone.
Yeah, I mean, I take the point, and it's a valid example of where it would disproportionately disadvantage somebody. But surely that's the exception that proves the rule, that a lot of people who can't afford to pay electricity bills are actually trying to limit the amount of usage, but they're not getting a great deal of benefit because the standing charges are so high.
And obviously, as you kind of move forward and hopefully we see wholesale costs continue to come down, the standing charge element of that is going to become even more of a problem. So you could look as well at like how we pay for the investment in the grid. At the moment, that's done through essentially through bills, through standing charges, and actually that could be moved on to general taxation. It's a major nationwide infrastructure project that we're looking at to improve the grid. So that could be taken out of standing charges and put into general taxation or through another form of investment from the government.
Thank you. I'll move to Lloyd Russell-Moyle.
Unit price.
Thank you very much. The example that you gave there was quite interesting, Chris, because I thought we had a system of support for people on disabilities, and we have a system of support for extra if you use oxygen or if you are terminally ill. We already have that. So are you saying we just need a bit more money in that, or are you trying to push down energy standing charge reform into the never by throwing in lots of things that are a little irrelevant?
No, not at all, Lloyd. Just to be clear, yes, there are support mechanisms in place. Certainly what we see when we talk to our customers, when we look, for example, at the growing level of energy debt that we're carrying, then what we see is that the support that exists for those customers who those families who are on very low incomes does not go far enough. So, to Abigail's point, we have called for example, a social tariff to support those customers who need it most. If I look at this winter, then what we did for our customers this winter was introduce a 50% and 25% discount on the energy bill plus debt forgiveness for those families with those households on very low incomes. That's the type of support that I'm calling for. Alongside that, what I believe that we need to do, though, is we need to address some of the fundamental drivers of the cost of energy. The biggest drivers of the cost of energy are the wholesale price and network costs. And I think what we need.
We're trying to really explore the division between the unit rate cost and the standing charge cost. So do you think customers understand what is driving this increase in the standing charge?
I think there's more that we can all do, Lloyd, to improve the level of transparency that we have around customer bills. There's work that we're doing on that currently, which I'm happy to share with the committee in writing. I think there's work we can all do more across the sector to improve the level of transparency and help customers better understand what is driving the cost of energy.
Simon, what changes would you hope from Ofgem to the current standing charges?
So I think if you look at, first of all, that Ofgem are already reviewing suppliers' operating costs, headroom, EBIT allowances. Obviously, that we'd want to see those come down. Certainly, things such as operating costs and marketing could well be put onto unit costs potentially once they've been reviewed, because that might actually drive more competition on price potentially. So you might not see energy firms sponsoring Premier League football clubs, for example.
Do you think it would be fairer then to be much clearer on the standing charge that it covers fixed infrastructure and doesn't cover any of the operations of the actual energy companies?
I think that would be one thing, but as I say, I think we'd actually prefer to see that some of that infrastructure investment moved on to general taxation and not on bills at all. I think the other thing, as Chris mentioned, a lot of that is the cost of the infrastructure, and obviously those firms are making, that is where there is significant amount of profit in the energy system. So around £30 billion over the last few years has been made in profit by the gas networks and transmission operators, and that is an area that could be used to bring that down.
So I know I have to return shortly. So £30 billion has been made in profit
in the network and transmission.
In the network and transmission, and the consumers are still being charged for £1.3 billion worth of debt. So rather than taking the debt, which all other businesses do, out of the profit line, they're passing that debt payment back onto the consumers, even though they're making huge profits.
Chris might know this better than me, but I think that's because of the difference between the transmission and the network companies and the retailers and suppliers.
So we need to put that debt in the right place.
Yeah, well, you need to make sure the support is there and you know, that might be how does the wider energy industry that is making so much profit, and again through the producers as well, how do we get that money to the people who need it, those people in energy debt, those people who need a social tariff potentially.
Separation. Yeah, it's the separation is the problem. Abigail, is there anything? I'm interested particularly around how do we get consumers to know better what that distribution between their bills are, and particularly how do we drive changes of behaviour if we change the bill structure?
Yeah, absolutely. We see consumers are not aware of the difference between the volumetric charges and the fixed costs on their bill from the advice services that we deliver across Great Britain. For example, in Home Energy Scotland, we often get calls from people not understanding their energy bills and how they're made up. And similar to the example that Chris said of people being in hospital for a long time and still having to pay standing charges, and this just accruing. So there's a massive piece of work that needs to be done from our point of view on supporting consumers. Like we do in Scotland, we run Home Energy Scotland, which is an advice network which offers expert, impartial and tailored advice to consumers to help them reduce their energy use, improve the energy efficiency of their home and manage their bills more. And this has been in operation for a number of years and has been a real success, and it's really key in enabling people to make the changes in their homes for the long term, because an important point to make here is that energy bills will be brought down if we improve the efficiency of our housing stocks. Obviously, we have some of the most inefficient housing stock in Europe, and that's been one of the drivers of high energy bills.
And to get that change for more home insulation, do we need to change the structure of the bill so it's more on volumetric and less on standing charge, or will that not make much difference?
I'm not sure what difference that would make, but I do think that whatever changes is made and that standing charges do need to be reformed and energy prices do need to be brought down, but also alongside that to future-proof households from future price shocks, because it's going to be a long-term thing that needs to happen to bring down energy bills. We need to insulate people's homes to protect them in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. Vicky Ford, you want to come in briefly?
Briefly, we need to save energy. We need to encourage energy efficiency. If everybody has to pay equally to the cost of infrastructure through either standing charge or general taxation, no matter how much energy they waste, there's no incentive for people to save energy. Do you agree, Abigail? This idea that you just take the standing charge and whack it onto general tax, so everybody has to pay towards the future infrastructure. So shouldn't you put it on the unit charge instead?
That is one option that's been explored, but obviously as we've discussed, that could be detrimental for people who
provided we can get the dialysis.
Yes, that we've got the social charge. That is one option that could be taken forward. But as I said before, we really need the government to bring forward its affordability consultations so that we can take into account the distributional impacts and that assessment, because without that it's really hard to know what the impacts will be, and it's just kind of modelling and guesswork at this point. So we really need that forum to be able to get a consensus of what the best way is forward to bring energy bills as a whole down.
Thank you. No, but just quickly, you mentioned that people on dialysis machines. We know that's about, depending on the measurement, between 13 or around 30% in fuel poverty. What percentage are using dialysis machines?
I'll have to come back to the committee in writing on that. Just to that point though, I used that example, but if you to the point that Sir Mark made, if you think about moving some of those costs onto the unit rate, then those customers who use more energy will pay more. And if I think about the comparison that just one point that might help, just the comparison that we see between a customer living in, say, a 1970s, 1980s three-bedroom semi-detached house and a customer living in a modern five-bedroom, well-insulated home, it is the former customer who will be using more energy and therefore paying more, whereas their income may well be lower than the latter example.
Thank you. Mark Henrik.
Well, just before I move on to my question to address that last point, still, I would imagine the number of people using dialysis machines, albeit it's a very important issue, is minuscule in comparison to most consumers who are who can't afford to pay bills, and particularly standing charges at the current levels. Can I ask, first of all, Simon, does he think that standing charges in any way address fuel poverty in this country?
Just to pick up on that point first, so research that 38 Degrees and Survation have done suggests that around between 10 and 15% of the population are reliant on energy for some form of medical needs, whether that is dialysis machines, which is one thing, but also charging wheelchairs or keeping medicines cool in a fridge. So it actually is quite a significant chunk of the population.
Dialysis machines in particular?
I don't have a figure for dialysis machines.
You'd have a fridge on anyway.
Sorry?
You'd have a fridge on anyway.
Yeah.
You're not putting the fridge on for medicines, you're just putting something extra.
No, but if you didn't have, if you turn the fridge off in order to save money, then your medicines would.
Okay.
But it's a broad term for those people who may be reliant on energy for some form of medical.
Is there any data on who turns? Is there any data on who many turn fridges off?
No.
Sorry, but there's a really important point. You raised talking about charging wheelchairs. There are huge numbers of mobility scooters of pensioners across all of our constituencies. So there is good example. I mean, the dialysis machine is probably not a brilliant example because there's very few, but the wheelchair charging is a good example.
So Mr. Chairman, can I just...
I
know...
That was sorry. Sorry, and the point being made to Mark Henry, so 10 to 15%.
I think Simon wanted to enlarge on his answer. In addition to that, can I ask Simon, how does standing charges discriminate against the various social classes?
So I think, as you say, I mean, we don't think that standing charge is really a kind of a help for people, especially as we say, as they're going to create a bigger percentage of the bill as hopefully as wholesale costs come down. And for those who are on prepayment meters, of course, they will be paying a standing charge regardless of whether they use any energy or not. So I think that there's clearly a problem there that needs to be looked at. What we need to do is look at all the ingredients that go into a standing charge, review them, bring them down as much as we can, and then look at the impact assessment of what would happen if we moved something onto unit costs or moved it onto general taxation. And I think, as sort of charities, we don't have access to that analysis off GEM, and the government are the people who can run that analysis and provide information that will then help us to say whether we agree with proposals on that or not.
Can I ask Abigail what her view is from an energy saving point of view on the issue of different social classes? I mean, some people who are very poor might be living in an old house, very badly insulated. Somebody who's quite well off and can afford it has actually made the investment in heat pumps and everything else. So how do you square the circle in that case?
So I think it's fair to say that the protections for those on the lowest incomes or the most vulnerable is not fit for purpose right now, and that a lot of people fall through the cracks on these schemes that seek to identify these people. And that is why, again, we really need this consultation brought forward by the government, because we need a well-targeted mechanism to identify these vulnerable consumers, which just isn't there at the moment. Yes, there's the War Home Discount. Yes, there are other schemes that pick up some people, but on the whole, there are pockets of people that are being left behind, and we really need to work on a better mechanism for identifying and assessing households depending on their need. And yeah, that's a really key step that needs to happen, as well as all these other things that come into place, like reviewing standing charges and energy bills. But we also need to get this targeted support, because in an era of high energy bills that aren't going away, Cornwall Insights say that we're going to be paying high energy bills into the next decade. We need to get the targeting right, because as we've heard, debt is rising, energy bills are rising, and we need a long-term solution. With affordability, there's also the importance, as I said, of energy efficiency and insulating people against high energy bills. Again, because in an era of high energy bills, that is the permanent and quickest and long-term effective solution to reduce people's energy bills in total.
Finally, Chris, can you tell us what you feel standing charges do in terms of incentivising customer behaviour towards reducing consumption, or is it the converse that they don't? I
think that the key the key things that we have to do to really drive down energy bills and drive down the cost of energy is to reduce the amount of energy that people consume, and is to reduce in doing that to reduce the amount of energy that people import from the grid.
What does standing charges do that? That's my question.
Personally, I don't believe that standing charges provide an incentive or a disincentive to do that.
Quite neutral on that.
I think that I don't think standing charge. I don't think a discussion on standing charges and the impact of standing charges is tackling the key drivers of the cost of energy. The key drivers of the cost of energy is the wholesale cost of energy and the network cost.
Behavioural change.
As I said, I don't believe that standing charges drive behavioural change.
Abigail?
No, I'd agree that they're not driving that, and that's why we need this holistic approach to review this, because it's difficult to know the different impacts that different changes will happen from moving certain things off standing charges or onto unit costs. We really need that forum to discuss it, and like I said, Citizens Advice and the new Economics Foundation have done some fantastic work looking into how a social tariff might work with standing charges as well. So we've got the information that organisations have brought forward, so we now need to have a discussion and a debate on how to now take this forward, because I think everyone agrees that something needs to change to make...
Nobody seems to know what it is.
Thank you. So much. And Mark Posey?
Yeah, when we visited Chris Norbury's business in Coventry, he set out very kindly for us the components of the standing charge and how it was a very large proportion of the bill. I don't think it's fair for each of our witnesses to say to us, we're going to wait for the government to bring a proposal before we tell you what we think should be and shouldn't be in the standing charge. So, Chair, can we press each of our witnesses, they're here as experts, to tell us what they think should and shouldn't be in the standing charge?
Or get rid of it altogether.
Spotlight's on you, panel. Simon, first.
Yeah, okay. As I say, what we need to see is the review of all the elements of it to get the costs down. We shouldn't have...
Reviews the long grass.
Hold on.
We shouldn't have the marketing costs, the operating costs of suppliers in there. They should be put onto the unit costs. We would say you need to move the investment and the network costs onto general taxation, because it's a priority for the country. And I think you also, need to make sure that there's no headroom or EBIT allowances that are on standing charge, but they're on unit costs as well. So they're the main things, I think.
Thank you.
We would, as I said, we would be open to moving the operational cost. We'd be open to moving those costs associated with serving customers from the standing charge onto the unit rate. I do not believe that the distribution network cost should be moved from the standing charge onto the unit rate. I believe there may be some unforeseen consequences of doing that.
What about into general taxation?
It's
uncertain.
It's not something that we've considered moving it onto general taxation, no.
And quickly and briefly, Abigail as well.
So we haven't considered what exactly should be moved around and where things should be going, and that's, I know I keep coming back to it, but it is really important that we see the distributional impact from the government, because different organisations have brought forward proposals and these need to be discussed and decided on, because we haven't in detail thought about where they should go. We just know that the affordability of energy bills in the round need to be addressed.
Excellent question, Mark Posey. Now to Mark Garnier.
And you'll be delighted here we're moving away from standing charges onto locational pricing. So there's been a report that's or some work, Catapult and FTI Consulting have done some analysis and came to the conclusion that if you go for nodal pricing, you'll reduce energy bills by 51 billion by over 2025 to 2040, which is £120 per household, or for zonal pricing, 31 billion over the same period. So this sounds kind of pretty impressive. I mean, given the fact that we're looking to move energy pricing to where there's a high demand or where there's high supply model. But nonetheless, it comes down to the fact that this is then spread amongst consumers. Abigail, is there a moral imperative to get on with this super quickly?
Yes, I think there is. I think, as you said, there's if this was introduced, there's huge savings that can be made across the GB market. And whilst it's true that some consumers, for example, in the North of Scotland and Northern England will benefit more, it's important to remember that the whole of GB will benefit from this in a substantial way. I don't have the exact numbers, but the kind of megawatt that you pay for energy is brought down on a whole in that report. So yes, it's really important that these wholesale market reforms are taken forward and that this is considered, because, as you said, the price that can be saved until 2035, that's a way off. So we need to kind of get on with it, because, like you said,
you really crack on. But Chris, we're now talking about savings of up to £51 billion. So where's that savings coming from? Because it doesn't sound like everybody's going to benefit from it. If the consumers are saving this, where's the price going on? Who's going to pay more?
We would support a move to zonal price. We would be supportive of a move to zonal pricing.
Zonal as opposed to nodal?
Sorry?
Zonal as opposed to
zonal
nodal.
as opposed to nodal, yes. There are trade-offs in anything that we do here, and what we need to be careful of is what zonal pricing will do. We believe will incentivise the build-out of renewable generation, for example, closer to the markets which it's intended to serve. It will incentivise solutions such as flexible assets, demand-side flexibility, which help mitigate the capital cost of the upgrade required to the distribution and the transmission networks, which drives a saving for customers. But at the same time, we need to be mindful of the fact that moving to zonal pricing could take up to 5 years to implement. And there are other things that we can do to deliver benefits for customers in that period. For example, the energy on subscription trial that we're currently running in the northwest of England can deliver up to we believe will deliver up to £800 per annum bill saving for the average customer, incentivising reforming the market, continuing to reform the market to incentivise, for example, the implementation of heat networks in areas of high density occupation, where you are recycling waste heat using solutions such as our ectogrid technology. All of those things are things that we can implement now, which will deliver significant bill savings to customers in a shorter period of time. As a consequence,
just on this, this all sounds great, and you're talking about getting the energy, finding this 51 billion out of savings in things like the grid and all the rest of it. But what bothers me about this is that in the Midlands, for example, where you've got a lot of energy consumption, then presumably the price will go up relative to, as you say, kind of Unst in North Shetlands, where you can't move for a wind farm and there's nobody using electricity. So presumably at some point in the early stages of this, in order to drive the behaviour you want, you're going to see prices rising.
There are quite nobody using electricity in the Scottish Islands, but anyway.
Sorry.
There are absolutely trade-offs, Mark. There are trade-offs in terms of...
at long term you get the smoothing out, and
Yeah.
I get that. You've got the price to market, basic economics, which drive it. But to start off with, there's got to be, at some point, a rise in prices in some areas.
There are potential trade-offs such as that.
And how do you protect consumers?
Yes.
Simon, you must be thinking quite hard about this, because potentially, if there's quite a lot of kind of poverty in these areas, and people are going to be affected if you see consumers seeing their prices rise.
Yeah, and obviously, we have regional pricing at the moment that discriminates against people especially in North Wales and Merseyside and in Scotland. And I think, and another example is there's a tariff that's just come on the market from one of the upstart energy firms, which is discriminating against people in northern Scotland by a cost of tune of £716 a year. Basically, that form of discriminatory tariff has to be banned by Ofgem. It was banned between 2009 and 2012. So you could protect by banning discriminatory tariffs in the short term until you can see these sort of solutions come through. So we are concerned, I think, about kind of what is the impact of some of the locational pricing, especially on those areas that you talk about. I think, obviously, one of the things that can be used to offset that, as Chris has mentioned, is things like heat networks and community energy generation. So I think it needs to be seen as a package. Unfortunately, when we've asked the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero about kind of impact assessments on this so that we can actually give some answers to this, that they've not done equality impact assessments on their retail energy, retail electricity market arrangements work to date. So we don't know how...
You would want us to press them?
Absolutely, yeah. Their consultation on that ended yesterday, but we can't answer the questions because we don't have the information. They've not done the work to look at what the impacts are and who those people are who might lose out from that.
Abigail, do you want to come back?
I just wanted to add that a big part of that costs will go up for some people potentially in the short term, as I said before, the long-term permanent solution for lower energy bills is to drive energy efficiency at pace and scale across the country. As I've said, we've got the leakiest homes in Europe. According to the ECIU, the worst performing homes spent on average £600 more than an EPC rated C home, and this is progress on improving the energy efficiency of our housing stock has been far too low. And as we increasingly move to a more renewables based system, more efficient homes is going to help the grid by using less energy in the home. So this needs to really be a kind of national infrastructure priority from our point of view, because energy efficiency brings those bills down.
Just to summarise, so locational zoning is no silver bullet. There'll be problems in the short term because you'll get price rises where you don't want them. You need to mitigate for those price rises, but long term it drives the behaviour which you want in terms of where you generate and all the rest of it. But we've still got to do all the other stuff as well.
Are you certain there will be price rises? Because one of the things that some people will say is that the constraint payments will go, which customers are currently subsidising generators with up to a tune of £1 billion a year. Yeah. And if the removal of the constraint payments goes with zonal, that everybody will have lower bills, but just different forms of lower.
Yeah. There could be a benefit as associated with the removal of the constraint payments. Equally there are risks in terms of liquidity and liquidity in the market that need to be borne in mind. And back to the point that others have made, changes such as the introduction of zonal pricing, in our view, should only be done in conjunction with an increased investment in energy efficiency and the scale-up of new business models such as the energy on subscription trial that we're currently running, which delivers £800 bill savings to those customers who participate.
Thank you. Great pleasure to bring in the newest member of the committee, Dr. Trace Coffey, who's joined us today. Dr. Coffey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Location of a different kind. 15% of households are off the gas grid, so by default it's automatically more expensive to heat their homes. That could be through oil or LPG, but also inner cities where it's solely electric. I wanted to find out from the panel what they thought about how help could be given there. I'm not looking to regulate the price of oil, but in particular I'm keen to understand Digital Economy Act 2017, clauses 36 and 37 were deliberately brought in to help the transfer of data so that energy companies could identify customers and reduce fuel costs. So I just wanted to get a sense of why is it with Eco4 and these other schemes, it still seems we're spending half of the money, the grant, on admin, and only half, if that, on actually doing work to reduce energy costs. In particular, I'd like to hear from Mr. Norbury what efforts they're putting in, but I'd be grateful to hear from Mrs. Ward or indeed Mr. Francis.
I think you're right to call out some of the complexity associated with Eco4 and with GBIS. I think if you take, for example, the requirement for a home to increase by 2 EPC ratings in order to be eligible, then there's a degree of complexity there that is preventing us from delivering the benefits to customers that we all want to deliver. If you look at some of the standards that are applied associated with the GBIS scheme, I understand where they come from because some of the history of insulation in the UK. But the consumer standards that are being applied, in our view, are too rigorous and are preventing us from deploying GBIS funding and getting insulation into the homes of those people who need it most. There is complexity associated with these schemes that can easily be addressed, reduce the admin burden, get the benefit into more homes more quickly.
I don't know if Mrs. Ward wants to comment, but I wanted to find out, and perhaps we can write to the energy companies, on how you are using the powers available to you to get the information, so you're not spending quite so much on the admin of finding eligible people, because that's why the law was changed nearly 10 years ago. 7 years ago, sorry.
So just on the admin costs, so yes, you're completely right that too much is being spent on valuable government money that should be going towards households to help them upgrade their homes. And we see in Scotland from our delivery of advice to people that it dramatically reduces that admin cost, because people who come into Home Energy Scotland are directed to schemes that they're actually eligible for, because I think that a lot of people in England are probably not even sure that they're eligible for certain schemes and are not even aware that they exist. So the advice that we have in place kind of helps to match people with the measures that they are entitled to, and it also means that government money spent in a more effective way as well. So eco, for example, goes towards much more of the homes that need it, whereas in England, eco doesn't go to, I think it's between 10 and 30% to fuel poor homes, which obviously it's a fuel poor scheme, and that should be much higher. And then on your point about rural communities, again, I'll point to Scotland, where they have much better green finance on offer for homes in general, but also for off-grid gas homes. So, for example, for a heat pump, you can get obviously there's the boiler upgrade scheme that's 7,500, but the Scottish Government topped that up to 9,000 if you live in a rural area, to take into account the more expensive measures. And there's also grants available for those who are on low incomes. So we see that as really driving the higher installation rates that we see in Scotland, because it takes into account that there are different types of household.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Vicky Ford.
So social tariffs. If one wanted to subsidise energy prices for those on very low incomes, who should pay for the subsidy? Chris?
We've set out a proposal which is a model that we see in the Dutch market, that our business in the Dutch market participates in, which is a co-funded model for the energy sector and government coming together to fund what is effectively a social tariff. The distribution or the eligibility for which is administered by the equivalent of the consumer champion, joint government and sector-wide funding. Yes.
Simon.
I think
who should pay?
Who should pay? Well, I think what we need to do is make sure that it is the widest possible energy industry definition, because I think, as Chris said, like that model in Holland sounds quite interesting in that you've got the transmission, network distribution, and generating companies that are all making in total 400.
You're saying energy companies should.
Yeah,
pay
I mean, if that doesn't cover it, then government might need to step in.
So we don't have a firm view of who should pay for a social tariff. We just know that it's drastically needed. No.
So, if energy companies pay, aren't they just going to charge their other customers more? And to use Theresa May's description, the just about managing people, why should they have to pay higher energy bills to subsidise those on very low incomes? Simon.
So, I mean, I think though what we're saying is it's the why we don't want this going on. We don't want this to be added onto a standing charge or anything like that. This has to be done by the widest definition of the energy industry to get that money.
Energy customers should pay, but not necessarily through.
So domestic energy customers should not be seeing an increase in their bills in order to fund this charge. It should be done.
Where does the magic money come from?
Well, there's £420 billion generated by the energy industry over since 2020.
So energy companies' profits.
Yeah.
Chris?
I mean, the model that we set out does not include the redistribution of the cost onto customers' energy bills.
Where does it come from then?
Well, if you look at what we did this winter for our customers, we're not an upstream generator, we don't have an upstream gas position, we're not a network operator. Our margin in the UK is 2%, but we spent £82 million this winter delivering a 50 or 25% discount on the energy bill for our customers on very low incomes. That is a model that can be followed.
But at some point
But that model is limited, hence the joint funding.
So a mixture of income from government, so everybody's tax is going up, plus lower profits for energy distributors.
If you look at the cost of energy debt, both in terms of the cost of energy debt to the energy sector as a whole, to look at the cost of servicing energy debt to customers who can afford to pay their bills. You look at the wider cost of debt, as Simon has mentioned earlier, to society. We believe there is a payback there.
Abigail, you've been listening to them on this. Who should pay the subsidy? Where should the money come from?
Again, we haven't got a firm view on where.
No, I'm interested in your view. Okay,
I'm here representing Energy Saving Trust, so I don't think I can give my personal view. But I think it's important to, as I come back to it again, the energy efficiency piece. That if the government invests in energy efficiency, that means everyone's going to pay lower bills anyway. So their bills are going to come down. So that could potentially make room for other things to be added on, because I think that's a really important thing to look at this as a whole affordability
Really
issue.
glad you said that. So don't forget about the energy efficiency incentives in anything that was structured. Just if you wanted to identify, I mean, shouldn't you pay those on lower incomes more in terms of other welfare benefits to then enable them to be able to cover their bills, Chris?
That is absolutely an option, yes. That's absolutely an option. What matters to us is that those customers, we have 960,000 customers on the priority services register who have a household income of less than £20,000 a year, that whatever the mechanism, that those customers get the support they need for what you quite rightly point out is a cost of living challenge. Absolutely. And then just to Abigail's point, to drive energy bills down, investment in energy efficiency and a reduction in the customer's exposure to the wholesale market through different models such as the ones I've described.
Simon, why should we subsidise energy bills if we don't subsidise food bills, clothing bills, phone bills?
I think because of the health impact as well as again as another potential cost, the cost of the NHS of people living in cold damp homes, and I think the Institute of Health Equity have done some really good work on that cost, which would be worth you look at. I don't have the figures to hand, I'm afraid, but you know, there is a massive cost there, and also as we,
just last question, and it's probably for Chris and maybe for Simon. If you were trying to identify who should be eligible for social tariffs, is it reasonable to share household income data with private companies?
The way that the model works in the Netherlands is that the data is collated by a third party who is effectively the consumer champion, and the administration of the scheme is through that consumer champion. So the data sharing takes place, but the data sharing takes place via an independent third party. I do believe that as a sector, there is a greater opportunity for data sharing as a whole to enable us to better identify those customers who need support.
Absolutely finally, I can understand the need to support those when energy prices were really high, but in a normal year, if prices came down to pre-crisis level again, do you still think there would be a need for this support, Chris?
And absolutely briefly.
Yes or no?
Yes, energy debt is rising.
It's the data bit. Chris, how can you be confident that the money that you're making available is going to the right people?
We can be confident insofar as the quality of our data, which we believe is very good and increasing.
You don't have access to DWP,
but we don't have
HMRC data, so how can you be confident?
Hence my point in terms of data being shared with an independent third party from all of those sources to ensure the data quality and the administration of the scheme.
You're comfortable that you're providing support to the right people right now?
I'm comfortable that we're doing the best that we can with the data we've got.
No, but just a quick point before I go to Barry Gardner. You mentioned your profits are capped in the UK at 2% because you're an energy retailer company. Mm-hmm. There are other companies working in the energy space in generation and in distribution. Their profits aren't capped. Do you have any views on that, given that you've got a 2% cap and others can make perhaps rapacious profits, some people might say?
I don't have any views on that.
Fair enough. Barry Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Norbury, the price cap that Ofgem have set this year will see consumers paying up to £1.3 billion in debt-related costs. Yep. That means that all of us who are bill payers are paying for any user of energy who has not paid their bill to you, who's behind in their payments. Do you think that gives you a perverse incentive not to worry up to the tune of 1.3 billion?
No.
Why not?
We are at the end of 2023, we had £930 million worth of debt on our books. If you look at our bad and aged debt, that is round numbers in excess of £500 million. The cost of servicing that debt, the bad debt charge for our retail business in the UK, is over 4.5%. The cost of servicing debt and the cost of serving customers who are in debt and the impact of that on our other customers is significant. There is no incentive for us to do what you describe because it is not in the interest of our customers.
Okay. So in all, the industry, I think, had £3.1 billion worth of debt. And as you say, you're paying interest on that debt, aren't you? But you also are sitting on £7 billion, more than double the amount of consumer credit balances. So surely the money that you can make on the credit balance, that £7 billion, is offsetting to some extent the servicing of the £3.1 billion, hasn't it?
I'll come back to the committee in writing on that on the detail of that point.
Well, I'm not asking for the detail, but by all means write to us and give us the detail. What I'm asking you for is the common sense principle. If you're able to be getting interest on £7 billion, surely that offsets the interest you're paying on the 3.1, and therefore you don't need to be overcharging us, as Ofgem's allowing you to do, by 1.3 billion a year.
As I said, I'll come back to the committee in writing on the point that you make.
Effectively, yes.
I'll come back to the committee in writing on the point that you make.
Okay. No more questions, Chair?
No more questions. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to Vicky Ford.
So it's really about innovation to reduce your bills, Abigail, energy efficiency. How does the current market structure encourage people to save money by improving the efficiency of their homes?
It doesn't, no.
Okay. What would you like it to look like?
From Energy Saving Trust point of view, as I've mentioned, we really want a national retrofit plan for England to bring down people's bills in the first place, because we need to insulate people from long-term energy prices which are not going away. The progress on upgrading the UK's homes has been painfully slow, particularly in England. And as I mentioned, we see in Scotland that there's a national advice service at people's disposals to help them reduce their energy bills, but also helps them with behaviour change and knowing how to reduce their energy use. So we see that as a massive gap in England. And one of our main calls to the government is to set up a national retrofit advice service in England to really help consumers understand how they can make changes to their homes that will bring down their bills. On top of this, we also need green finance to come into play here as well, which again we see in Scotland and we've seen across the border in France as well, where the mix of tailored impartial advice that is relevant to people's homes married with green finance to help them with the upfront costs of these is getting things into people's homes, making them more efficient, making them lower cost to run. So the combination of a national retrofit plan, national advice service and green finance, they all need to
I remember seeing some data a little while ago that suggested that when you look at social rented houses, actually quite a large proportion of those had been improved, and it was more the homeowner and especially those off-grid ones that Therese was speaking about earlier. Is that correct? That's the sector?
Yeah, there's some good work going on through Eco and through Warmer Homes Scotland, for example, where low carbon technologies are being put into people's homes, as well as energy efficiency measures, which is fantastic because it's giving those low income.
And that's on
consumers,
social rented.
Yes, and owner occupiers and those in the private rented sector are quite at disadvantage, particularly in England. Like I said, in Scotland, advice is free to anyone. Green finance is available to everyone. And in England, there's really a discrepancy between support available to different parts of the market.
Do the cold weather payments help to incentivise people to make sure their homes retain warmth? No. In
the era of high energy bills, I don't think they do, because everyone's energy bill is higher and it's just negating the high energy costs, and there needs to be a longer term solution. Those payments are fantastic for people that are living on very low incomes and need that that income to come in. But in the long term, energy efficiency is the most effective and permanent solution.
And these green finance initiatives that you've seen in France and Scotland, is that public money? Is that unlocking loans?
So it's a mix of both. So in Scotland, it's government money, so government grants and loans. But we see it also unlocking private finance, because if there's a national retrofit plan which gives long-term view of what the government expect to happen in England in upgrading people's homes, that also unlocks private money for certainty of long-term energy efficiency plans to give.
France, is that private money? Or?
I think that's government money. I'll have to double check with that. But again, that's in France, I think it's government money that's offered on a tiered basis. So the lower income you are, the more money as a grant that you get. And those on to obviously ensure equity. So we've seen some really good models that could be.
Again, I would be very interested to see how you unlock non-government money for homeowners to invest in savings in their homes. Any other fundamental changes the gentleman would like to speak about to help to deliver warmer houses for vulnerable customers, but also for others?
I think I just echo what Abigail said, but also just to really iterate the point around the private rented sector. And I think that's a real challenge that we're seeing. And obviously there were attempts to improve the minimum energy efficiency standards in the private rented sector that were abandoned. And I think that would be something that the government should look at again.
Chris?
I'd agree with the points that both Simon and Abigail have made in terms of energy efficiency, green finance, and the private rented sector. In addition to that, what I think we should be doing is reforming the market to incentivise models such as the energy on subscription model, which I've described.
Which is the energy
on subscription model.
Sorry, say that again.
Energy on subscription.
Energy on subscription model.
Where there is a trial that we are running currently in the northwest of England. That trial will deliver, on average, an £800 per year bill saving to the customers who participate. To the point that Simon's made earlier, accelerate.
Could you explain what that does? Sorry, I haven't heard about it.
A customer takes in that example, a heat pump, solar, battery on subscription. So there is no upfront capital cost. It is a subscription model, and in doing that, fundamentally the customer is importing less energy from the grid. The cost of energy reduces. The bill saving is on average £800 per customer. That is delivering a significant bill saving, and that bill saving includes the cost of the subscription that I've described.
So it's basically hire purchase your heat pump, battery, solar panel sort of
subscription
thing.
Model.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'd love to have more details of that, Chris.
It's like a mortgage.
Thank you. Just before we finish off with this panel, let's quickly ask, people watching hear of energy companies, and of course we know there are three types of energy companies. We have the generators, the transmitters, and the retailers. As I mentioned before, retailers such as yourself at E.ON, who have no other interest in any other basket, have a 2% cap by
in this country.
Ofgem in the UK, indeed, in the UK. And the question we really want to ask the three on the panel is the current balance of risk and rewards just for, firstly, consumers, secondly, retailers, transmitters and generators? What are your thoughts, very briefly? Simon?
No, and one thing we'd also like to highlight is...
Why not? Why are they not?
Well, I think one thing we'd also like to highlight is the fact that in the future, with things like time of use tariffs, we're also potentially uncovering people who might also be discriminated against in the market, because they have a smart meter that doesn't work, or they can't access a smart meter because their energy firm says they're not eligible for one in their home, or because they have to leave the house. So there's other energy exiles who might come into the market.
Why is the balance of risk and rewards not just... the balance of risk and reward is just between consumers, retailers, transmitters and generators?
No, there's...
So who's benefiting from the injustice?
So the transmitters, the network operators, and the producers seem to be the ones who are making
the generators and the transmitters
are making the most amount of profit on that. Yeah.
Very briefly,
if I may, could each of you say to us which of those categories, the consumers, the generators, the suppliers, on a scale of 1 to 10, bears most risk, and on a scale of 1 to 10, which one bears most reward? Let's just simplify it.
On you go.
Descending order. So So generators are getting the biggest benefit, followed by the transmission companies, followed by the retailers.
No, that's fine. We've got that
as a
quickly.
priority order.
So, and the customers are getting...
And the customers are at the bottom.
Chris Norbury, you're sort of in one of these, as well as, of course, being a customer, you could argue, but go on, primarily...
The balance of risk is skewed towards retailers and customers, and is skewed away from the generators and the transmission operators.
Thank you. So 2 of the 4, you'd say. And Abigail Ward?
As a consumer organisation, we would always say that consumers are at the forefront of our minds. So energy needs to be brought down as a whole. So as I've said, we need to take a holistic view of bringing affordability to all consumers.
Where do you think the balance of risk? Is there any injustice or is it a just system of risk between those 4 groups?
Well, I think we've seen from high energy bills that consumers are bearing the brunt of
and who are benefiting? Who are the ones who... If the scales of justice aren't fair, who are the ones that are benefiting from this?
I couldn't say exactly who is benefiting from it, but I know that the consumers are our priority. And
Alan Warren, thank you very much for that. It was a quick fire, robust discussion, a big committee today, well attended. We're going to take a pause for 2 minutes and we'll be back with panel 2, which will be just as interesting, if not more so. Thank you. Order.
Thank you.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
Order, and welcome back to the Energy Security and Net Zero Committee for our second panel of the morning on domestic energy bills. Again, we've got a panel of 3. I'll let them introduce themselves, name, rank and serial numbers, starting on my left.
Rachel Fletcher, Regulation Director for Octopus Energy.
Good to see you, thank you for coming.
Tony Green, the Future of Energy Director at SGN.
Likewise, good to see you and thank you for coming.
Chris O'Shea, Chief Executive Centrica, parent company of British Gas and Hive.
Thank you, all 3, and thank you, Mr. O'Shea, as well. Whose responsibility is it to ensure that energy remains affordable for domestic consumers? General open question. Rachel Fletcher, on you go.
Well, I think multiple parties have got different roles to play. Certainly as an energy supplier, we do have an important role, both in terms of keeping our own costs down and in terms of helping the customer with payment terms that allow them to afford their energy. But equally, government and the regulator have got an important role to play in terms of making sure that the market drives a totally efficient system, gets us off dependence of gas and onto cheaper, more affordable renewable energy, And Ofgem plays a very important role in incentivising the monopoly network companies to be efficient and to deliver what is needed for customers.
The last panel we heard is sort of I'm going to generalise, but I think what we heard was on the balance of risk between consumers, retailers, transmitters and generators, that the balance of the risks were more heavily skewed against the consumers and the retailers by regulation and what have you, and there's more unregulated space around generators. Do you have any particular comment on that and how that then feeds down? Because once electricity is generated at whatever price, basically transmitters, retailers, consumers then have to deal with that.
Yeah, I generally agree with the previous panel in terms of the skew of risk being towards retailers and to consumers. But I think this is less about reward. I think it's more about where are the real incentives to drive efficiency, and what we're not seeing is enough effort being put into ensuring that we have a low-cost and low-carbon energy system. And I think that's what we'd like to be seeing happening, both in terms of how wholesale markets work and in terms of how network companies are regulated.
Thank you. Tony Green, where do you think the responsibility lies to make energy affordable for domestic consumers?
I think it relies across the whole sector. It has to. I broadly agree with what Rachel was saying, apart from the fact that I believe that a whole systems approach is going to be required as we head towards net zero, and it's really driving through that balance as we navigate the journey to net zero, some of which is very uncertain as we go forward. As a network operator, we're regulated. We're allowed a 5% return on our investments. So that is very, very clear the way Ofgem have set that out for us, and we have to work within the efficiencies and the allowances that we're provided.
Retailers are 2%, which is Octopus, is that right?
It's a margin.
Margin, 2% margin, and you'd 5%? 5%. Okay, thank you. Chris O'Shea, where do you think the responsibility it lies for affordable energy for domestic consumers?
I think it falls across everybody involved in the sector: energy producers, energy retailers, network companies, consumers, the regulator and government. I think we all have to work together with NGOs, third sector organisations, to figure out how best we serve consumers in the future with the cheapest energy possible.
Given that 2%, 5%, does Ofgem regulate your margins?
It does. So we're regulated by a number of regulators. So we're an energy retailer. We're one of the largest gas producers in the North Sea. We're one of the largest electricity producers through our share, mainly nuclear power stations in the UK. So we're regulated by a number of regulators.
In the generation space?
In the generation space, Ofgem would regulate us. Yeah.
What's the margin there?
So the electricity production that we've got just now is completely merchant. So there's no cap on the margin. There's a 75% tax for nuclear. There's a 78% tax for gas production. And that is a cyclical business that goes from large losses in one period to large profits. At the moment, we've come out of a period where the profits were quite substantial, which saw far higher taxes. So we paid £1 billion in UK tax last year.
Ofgem are taking a different fundamental approach to you, because presumably anybody can argue that they've losses and profits, but your profits don't get capped, so you could charge anything?
So our prices are set by the wholesale market. So Ofgem regulate the wholesale market in the UK. So they don't regulate our prices. They regulate the wholesale market. The wholesale market operates to set the price for electricity. Some companies are regulated. They have contracts for differences. So effectively, wind farms have a fixed price. They have a subsidy from consumers. Nuclear power stations are not regulated, so that we get the price on the market. We have made the last 2 years very strong profits. The 3 years before that we made losses because the cost of producing the electricity was higher than the price that we got in the market for selling that electricity.
Okay, if you've made strong profits, then that means that the consumers have been paying more, because if versus what you've been paying for the fuel to create the energy.
So the wholesale costs are about 43% of a consumer's bill at the moment. So if you see higher wholesale costs, you see higher profits therefore for electricity companies.
That profit has to be coming from what consumers are paying, because the energy has got more expensive. So you're not, when energy got more expensive, you'd have thought, oh, these guys' profits, that'll be affected because they're buying this energy. But the next thing is the profits are going up as the energy's going up, which must mean you've been charging downline the consumers are paying more to line the pockets of generation companies?
Ultimately, the Ofgem set the price that consumers pay based on observable wholesale market prices. As an electricity generator, our profit before tax has gone up over the last couple of years as the electricity price has been higher. Our tax last year in the UK went up fourfold from £250 million to £1 billion as a recognition of some of the windfall taxes that were put in place and the higher prices as well.
The tax you're paying is a function of the profits you're making. You are going to be paying.
Absolutely, yeah.
So shouldn't the generator be in there? The regulator be in there and making sure that these profits are capped and that the consumers are not ultimately subsidising profits to large energy companies?
So when we had the start of the energy crisis, when we saw the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we did offer to sell our gas and electricity at a fixed price under a contract for difference. That was something that wasn't taken forward. It was, but we made that offer to cap our profits voluntarily. Government decided against doing that.
Well, that was quite fortunate for the...
No. We could see where the prices were going because look, we have.
They've helped your profits.
So if we capped our profits, it would have reduced them. But we have an interest.
That's what I'm saying. It's quite fortunate for the company that wasn't taken.
Well, I don't really see it that way because the reason that we proposed that to government is that it's in our interest to have affordable energy for consumers. We have 7.5 million energy customers in the UK, so we have about 24% of the market. It's not in our interest to have big profits in one part of our business and customers that can't pay. We've seen substantial increases in bad
Has energy
debts.
been affordable or not?
Well, you have to look at the numbers. At the moment, energy is clearly less affordable now than it was 4 years ago. It's come back down below the level it was before the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. But we've seen a general cost of living issue. So this is not just something that's limited to energy. This is people can't pay their mortgage, they can't pay their rent, they're using food banks. So this is part of a broader issue. Energy is undoubtedly part of it.
Isn't the cost of energy putting a squeeze and all that? I am stuck for time and I'm going to quickly Mark Hendrick and then I'm going to Mark Bossie.
Just quickly, Chris, I think I've met you before and
briefly.
Won't say too much. Is it true that you're effectively vertically integrated as a company?
Yes.
And does that give you the advantage of being able to move money around between your different businesses in order to offset gains here and losses there? That gives you a competitive advantage in terms of price?
We are vertically integrated and we don't have any network investments. So we produce and store gas and electricity. We ship it, we have a logistics business and we retail gas and electricity. We're not allowed to cross-subsidise. So our licence condition is Article 19B of the licence condition bans cross-subsidisation. But it does mean that if you've got low energy prices, you might lose money in your generation business, you might make slightly more because you've got lower bad debts. Indeed. But that's the choice that we've made. Other companies have made a different choice. We think that's better because we think it's better for consumers that companies are well capitalised and therefore consumers don't bear any risk.
We'll be touching on this more, I'm sure. Mark Bossie.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask about the role of smart meters in achieving, firstly, the broader energy objectives, but also helping consumers by giving them incentives about time of use and encouraging their efficiency. But we should have all had a smart meter by now, but we know that I think 20% or so have not yet been homes have not yet been installed, and the department's own figures show that 4.31 aren't working efficiently, and that's before we switch off the 2G and 3G network. So, to what extent is the failure of the smart meter programme adding to consumers' energy costs? Rachel, would you have a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately we can have a much cheaper energy system if we're giving customers the tools to shift their energy consumption and make best use of cheap green power. We've already got customers that are doing that and they're saving multiple hundreds of pounds.
What proportion of your customers have a smart meter?
Well, we've got, I think, over 60-70% of customers.
So 30% haven't. Why not?
Well, partly because it's a voluntary programme. The targets that we've been set run for another couple of years, and frankly, not all customers want a smart meter or are prepared to stay in for one.
What needs to be done to encourage those who haven't got one to take one?
We would like to see a much more customer-focused approach to the smart meter rollout, frankly, where actually as retailers we can focus firstly on, the customers that will benefit most from a smart meter are those that are currently on traditional prepay. Giving them smart prepay will be transformational.
Okay, so on average, how much more are they paying a year by not having the smart meter?
They're not paying more, but what they are having to do is to go outside to top up to top up their gas meter or electricity meter. And when they go off supply, energy suppliers don't know that, and so we can't step in to help them. So smart meters for prepay customers are transformational. We'd like to be able to devote our resources also to fixing the meters that are not working. At the moment, those numbers are not included in our smart meter rollout figures. And we'd like to be able to prioritise customers that are actively asking for a smart meter because they want to use it in order to save money. So a customer-focused approach is the right way.
Should we be focusing more on fixing the ones that don't work before we try and install more in the 30% of people who haven't yet got one?
And meeting pent-up demand. Okay. And I think that would then drive a more positive customer attitude towards smart meters.
Your assessment of where we are on smart meters?
It's actually not something that we're involved in at all, so I'll have to pass on.
All right, Chris, from the Centrica point.
So 56% of our customers have taken a smart meter. We've got about 600.
So 56 have, so 44% haven't.
Yes. So about 600.
That's an astonishingly high figure given the original projections of the smart meter scheme.
So 600,000 of our customers have, after at least 4 contacts, confirmed they don't want a smart meter. So it's voluntary at the moment. I have customers that write to me saying, please stop bothering me, I don't want a smart meter. I think if we want this to work properly...
So should we just abandon the project then? Because the benefits are essentially arose when everybody had got one, didn't they?
So the government figures show that gas consumption falls by 3.5%, electricity consumption falls by 3% if you have a smart meter. So those that don't have smart meters, on average, will be paying more because they'll be consuming more energy. We think that in order to have the proper smart grid that's required to keep costs low in the future, to have a more responsive grid, everybody should have a smart meter. One of the things we should consider as to whether this is a voluntary programme or whether this is a mandatory programme.
Do you think it should be a mandatory programme? You just said 44% of your customers don't want one. Why are you going to compel them to do something they don't want to do? So
44% of our customers don't have them. 600,000, so about 8% of our customers have said they don't want one. So there's you've got 36% there that we are not 100% sure whether they'll take one or not.
You've been communicating with them for 10 years trying to persuade them to have one. Surely you know why they don't want one.
It's true, but there's a cost to the smart meter programme, and the way that it works is you get a certain allowance in the price cap. So you have to try and install the number that you get an allowance on the price cap, and if you install less you get fined by Ofgem, and if you install more you don't recover the cost.
Does that regime need changing?
So personally,
it's clearly not working.
So I think if we want to have the smart grid that I think we all agree will reduce costs, then we should embark on a programme whereby it's not the responsibility of retailers to install smart meters, it's the responsibility of certain companies. We have 1,700 smart meter installers. We'd be very happy to install smart meters for any company, for Octopus, for E.ON, for anybody, and we'd be very happy for them to install. So we split the UK up street by street rather than customer by customer. We think you would get quite a lot of efficiencies that would reduce the cost. And so if you mandated it, then we could have that change-out programme. It could be done, I don't know, in the next 5 years or so.
So did you say you've got an assessment of how much those who haven't got a smart meter, how much extra they're paying?
So those that have got a smart meter are saving on average consuming 3.5% less electricity.
Those that haven't got one are paying 3.5% more than they need to.
So on average, those that don't have one, it would appear that they're consuming more gas and more electricity, and therefore they'll be paying more for their energy.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We've got three quick and brief interventions. I hope they're quick and brief. I think the first in was Mark Garnier.
Very quickly to those things. So I tried to get a smart meter in actually 2 homes I've got. One of which I was told it was that my 4-bedroom house was too complicated for a smart meter. By the way, it was neither of you two or any of this panel. And another one that apparently my walls were a bit too granity. So what's going on? Why, can either of you two compete against this other person in order to deliver a smart meter? Because I would really like one.
I could give a go and then maybe Rachel do the same. So some homes, it depends. If you've got 3-phase electricity, then smart meters are not designed for 3-phase electricity. So more like the larger homes sometimes have an industrial electricity supply. That's quite difficult.
4-bedroom house is not a large.
Then it shouldn't. So I don't have an answer for that, but very happy to get someone to have a look at it. For the walls being too granity, the smart meter has to send a signal. It's like having poor mobile phone signal in a home. So there are some homes that it's just very difficult. Either you don't have the right coverage.
On the outside?
Sorry?
Wire and narrow on the outside? I mean, there must be a way around it. I mean,
there's a way around everything.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, there is.
Sorry, Rachel,
I think this illustrates a point that at the moment the focus of the smart meter programme is how many meters can we put on the wall. And that means that there's very little incentive for a hard-pressed engineer to spend time really looking for bespoke solutions for your
Rogers Lamont, you want to come in? do so quickly.
Tony, your company does maintain and run the gas meter network, and you're the single company to do the gas meter network, is that right?
No, we run the pipeline assets. The actual meters are owned by other people. Okay. So it'll be the suppliers that look after the meters.
Is there, I mean, Chris is kind of hinting at this, but I wonder, would it be worth the DCC or some overarching body actually was the one that owned the meters, as the one that organised the supply of the meters, of course could contract you to actually do the physical installation, but rather than it being owned and decided by you, it should be a central body, surely, should it not?
So they're owned by any number of companies can own smart meters.
Yeah.
So we outsourced the ownership of our smart meters for many years. We've now brought that in-house. So we own the smart meters that we put on walls, and we get a rental for them. You could outsource that. There are some specialist smart meter companies you could outsource that. I don't think we need to change that part of it. I don't think financing is the problem. I think it's the way that we go house to house, street to street. I think that's the way to solve it. There's plenty of finance for
and
this.
Who should coordinate that then? Is it something like the DCC or Ofgem?
No, I think the DCC's got enough of his own problems to sort out. Could be very fine.
Anybody who should coordinate, or just leave the companies?
I think Ofgem are the perfect ones to coordinate this.
Thank you. Today's coffee.
This should not be done to consumers. What we see are people queuing up, asking for a smart meter, where we're offering them tariffs or tools that allow them to use a smart meter to save much more than the 3% energy savings that's been quoted, but hundreds of pounds a year.
I mean, I'm with Octopus and I still don't see the advantage of it. So.
Today's coffee.
Chris O'Shea, you've just mentioned coordination. You could look at something like the digital TV switchover, but I've got two particular questions, and feel free to write for Rachel and Chris. And it's to do with, do you share with Ofcom and Ofgem where you cannot do a smart meter because of lack of connection through mobiles? Because Ofcom is saying that we now have comprehensive coverage everywhere. And secondly, I think there's a regulation that the person has to be in the house for you to do that installation. How many of your failures are down to people just not being there, or you can't agree a time? What proportion?
I would need to come back to it on both. I mean, we do talk to our mobile telephone companies when we can't get signal, so there isn't universal signal. That's just
we
not
can leave you coming back to us.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to chip in?
Just to say that there is a specialist communications network for smart meters, so this is a matter for the DCC, not for Ofcom.
Yeah. No.
Being at home,
and that is a significant proportion of failed.
Now we move to the very patient Barry Gardner. Thank you, Mr. Gardner.
Thank you. Look, I'm struggling to work out who benefits, whether the energy market actually shares profits and losses fairly between consumers, retailers, transmitters, generators. And the report that UKERC produced said that the way the wholesale electricity market operates was making worse the impact of the energy crisis on consumers. The associated bill to consumers rose by £29 billion in 2022 compared to pre-COVID levels. And most of the additional revenue was associated with gas generation and renewable generators who are supported by the ROCs, Renewables Obligation Certificates. Between them, that accounted for 70% of the increased revenues. Now, the revenues to gas generators substantially exceeded the rise in costs. And when you look and see the profits that Shell, Equinor, Exxon, BP are making, we see surplus profits, 65 billion. So here we have the consumers paying 29 billion more. The generators are making 65 billion more. And yet, some of you would like to persuade us that actually this is the fair system and that the consumer is not being taken for a ride. Mr. O'Shea?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, in that case, I can't help you. You really don't understand the question.
Can we briefly rephrase?
There wasn't a question in there, there was a statement. So what is your question? I'll answer your question if you've got one.
I asked you whether you believe that the risks and rewards were being equitably shared across consumers, generators, transmitters, and every element.
So you've got a system whereby consumers are protected by the price cap.
Look, they paid 29 billion extra at the same time as the generators were making 65 billion pounds extra. So don't tell me they were protected. They may have had some protection, but they certainly saw a doubling in most cases of their fuel bills. So, you know, don't give me a relative and say, oh, well, they were protected by the price cap. No, they weren't. They saw a huge rise at the same time as people were making huge profits in this sector. How did that come about? And you can still say it's fair.
Sorry, to the point I'm making, so Ofgem are responsible for regulating the sector. I think Ofgem is answerable to this committee. The price cap allows a profit of 2% for energy retail companies.
You're saying, sorry, so what you're saying is, don't blame us, blame the regulator.
No, sorry, to be clear, so you mentioned BP, Shell, Equinor, so that's not, I can't answer for them. You have to talk to them yourself to understand. They mostly are in gas retail rather than power generation.
You're also a generator, though, aren't you?
Yeah, we're a nuclear generator. So we operate two very small gas-fired generators, standby generators, that come on when the wind stops blowing. So we've not been party to these huge profits that may or may not be made back from gas generators. So that's why I can't give you an answer to that question on behalf of Centrica. What I can tell you is price regulation has reduced bills to consumers substantially. Now, is it perfect? Absolutely not. Should it be changed? I think that's for this committee to think about. We have been very clear we call for the abolition of the standing charge, because we don't think that's right.
Yeah, we've been over that.
Well, we've not been over that in this session.
Let me move to Mr. Green and Ms. Fletcher.
So from our own perspective, our charges to customers haven't changed throughout that entire period. Our bill is about £168 for the consumer, and that's on the average dual fuel bill, 7 to 8%, and that's all incorporated it within the standing charge. That's not changed throughout. So we're not benefiting from any windfall at all. As I said earlier, we're regulated. We're allowed 5% return on regulated assets. So we've not seen any upside at all from the windfalls.
What I'd say is that consumers are currently exposed to international wholesale price increases that occurred as a result of the invasion of Ukraine. That's a result of us being overly dependent on imported fossil fuels. Consumers are exposed to an inefficient energy system cost. Those costs could be brought down significantly, as already been talked about this morning, by introducing zonal pricing and reducing the cost of constraints in particular. And consumers are exposed to the fact that we're not decarbonising quickly enough because renewable generators can't get access to the networks because they've not been built and connections haven't been dealt with properly. And we need to see stronger incentives and reforms to address all of these things. If we do that, we could be taking billions of pounds off the customer bill and insulating them from future geopolitical shocks. That's what we need to be focused on, all of us, everybody in the industry, companies and regulators and government alike.
Mr. Green and Mr. O'Shea, how many quarters have you been in profit in the last 15 years?
On an underlying basis, I estimate we will have been in profit from most of those. That excludes the write-down of asset values, which would have seen a reasonable number of quarters of substantial losses, but we can write to the committee and let you know.
I wouldn't have the details off the top of my head. Last year we were in profit, the year before we were in loss. So
you could write to the committee.
We could write and give you that.
Thank you. Mr. O'Shea, just on a lighter note, right? I watched your interview, as I'm sure many members of the committee did, where you said that your own salary of, I think it was $4.5 billion then, was unjustifiable. I think your salary's almost doubled to about 8 million since then.
Annually?
Annually, yeah, quite. And I don't want to take you up on that, because you said it wasn't your it was the remuneration committee that decided these things. I mean, you could always make a recommendation to the remuneration committee, but I'm going to leave that one there. My worry was about your mother, because you said that the reason that you understood how the consumer felt and the poor people felt was because your mother was living on a pension. Please tell me that her son, who's earning £8 million a year, is seeing his mother all right.
Do you want me to talk about my mother's financial affairs?
No. I just want to reassure the world that when you say the reason that you understood what poor people were going through was because your mother was living on a pension, you raised the issue of your mother's financial affairs.
I understand, but I see all sorts. So I understand the pressure that people have been under over the past several years. I understand that the energy prices increase came before Russia invaded Ukraine because we didn't have the right investment in the energy network. Prices doubled before Russia invaded Ukraine. I see that every day from customers. I get letters, emails, messages from customers every day. You get them from constituents. We work on that with you. I see this every single day. We have 10 million customers in the UK. People are struggling, but it's not just the struggle. The people that are struggling with their energy bills are struggling with their food costs, they're struggling with their mortgage, they're struggling with their rent, they're struggling with their council tax.
Is that a function of inequality?
I think you've got to raise that question. People, there are a substantial number of people in the UK.
5.3 million people currently live in households that are in debt because of their energy supplier. That's what the Citizens' Advice is telling us.
Those households are not just in debt to energy suppliers. They'll be behind with their council tax. They'll be behind with their rent, they'll be behind with their mortgage, they'll be using food banks. So the point is, yes, I do think there is inequality that we need to work together to solve.
Mr. Shea, on the point of inequality, what's the average salary within your company, and how long would it take the average salaried person in your company to earn, what was it, £8.1 million that you earn annually? How many years would it take for them to?
We've got 20,000 people in our company on average. The wage bill is about 1.3 billion, so
what's
the average
salary?
£65,000.
£65,000. So what would it take them, about 100 years?
No, it would take less than 100 years.
Less than 100 years? 80 years?
I don't have that number down.
Yeah, exactly. This is what. I mean,
but to be clear, that's not a salary. So I think that's slightly misleading. So that's there's a
that's your remuneration package.
Absolutely. So there's fixed and
okay. So how long would it take them to earn that earning £65,000 salary? That's what you're saying. Your average person in your company is getting.
It's the average cost.
How long will that take? I mean,
180.
It would take them 10 years to be at the foothills of that. At 650,000, it would take them 100 years to be at 6.5 million.
Yes.
So I was actually wrong. It's not less than 100 years. It's greater than 100 years.
It's about 400.
And we're talking about inequality. Is there not inequality within your company? Should we not start at home and companies such as I mean, I don't want to make this personal, but you're a personal example of this. Shouldn't companies such as your own that are making extreme fractions, or whose employees make extreme fractions, the CEO start to look and make equality something that's actually a core function of the company?
Chair, if I may.
Just want to be
no, I want to reinforce your
hold on. Okay, I'll reinforce.
The point is, Mr. O'Shea, your company engaged in fire and rehire. You told people that they were fired and that they could get their job back if they took it back on worse terms and conditions. Some people actually refused to do that, and they left your company for that. They weren't earning huge amounts of money, but that is what ultimately went to make the profitability of your company greater. And that's ultimately what your remuneration package depends on. And that would be my beef on this one, Chair, that actually some people actually left the company because they refused to take their own job back on worse terms and conditions at the same time as the profitability was being increased, which helped your remuneration package.
Mr. Gardner, firstly, I think that's you give half the facts there. So the part of the business that we had the biggest dispute with was our in-home servicing business. Last year that business lost £7 million. Now the reason that we had to restructure terms and conditions is because that business, the cost base was not competitive. Now you know that because we've exchanged letters on that. That business we're now building back into profitability. The reason that we did and took those difficult decisions was to secure the long-term future. Since that, we've recruited 1,500 apprentices. Before the terms and conditions changed, we had recruited 250 apprentices in 6 years. So we are creating thousands of well-paid jobs.
A little off the point here, Mr. Shea. The point was equality, and it would take 124 years for somebody on a 65,000 salary to match the 8.1 million. Does that seem to you a bit iniquitous?
Well, I think that it's appropriate for us to have a debate about equality in general.
Generally, does it seem iniquitous to you? Or
so
does it seem fair?
Markets set salaries.
Is it fair then?
What's fair to one person is not fair to another. As I said, I've been very clear that I am incredibly fortunate to be in the position that I'm in.
Thank you. Rachel Fletcher, just briefly, you mentioned the wholesale price had risen as a result of the Ukraine war. Why do you think the rise in the wholesale price due to a war of the raw material to make energy has resulted in profits for companies in between the point of the gas extraction to the consumer using energy? Why does the profiteering come from? I'm not saying it's you.
I don't know if there has been profiteering in the wholesale side of things or the sale of
Has anybody
of
made profits in this?
I mean, we're an energy retail company. We are not. We don't generate. I think that what we have seen is, as you've mentioned, government stepping in with windfall tax on renewable generators who've benefited from higher wholesale prices. But I think that the general point I'm making is that we need to insulate ourselves from these shocks in future, and the way to do that is to accelerate.
One thing I would say was under control is the profits of companies. We really can't affect global events if there's going to be a war, but we surely can regulate the profits of companies within the space.
Yeah, and I believe that has been done through the tax regime. So we saw a new windfall tax introduced on renewable generators during the energy crisis as a result.
Thank you. Very patiently, you've been waiting, Mr. Russell Moyle. Thank you.
Tony, who should own the energy infrastructure?
That's an interesting question. At the moment, obviously, we've got shareholders from around the world in many situations owning our assets.
Your company is owned by some pension funds and National Grid?
We're owned by Brookfield, by Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, and by GIP that have just been bought out by BlackRock. Okay. So we've got three of the largest infrastructure funds owning our organisation now.
Who pays for the infrastructure?
So we will invest in that infrastructure, and then it's effectively leased back over time and paid for by consumers.
So the consumers pay for it. There's a particular extra charge on energy bills. If the infrastructure is decommissioned, who should pay for it then?
This is one of the questions that is out there at the moment. Obviously, the question of decommissioning of the gas network is a question that people are considering, and decommissioning is not as simple as people are making out. The gas network
as we know with nuclear, it's a very complicated and expensive process.
It is, but it's also the importance of the gas network today. It provides a hugely resilient supply of energy to the country. There's 24 million gas consumers out there. There's industry on there. There's power stations on there. There's a lot of commercial applications on there. So decommissioning needs to be considered from a whole systems point of view. And we need to think through when there is a credible plan to actually achieve that. And then that credible plan's actually got to be delivered. So to give you an idea of if we want to move domestic customers off, it's around over 15,000 consumers a week have got to be moved between now and 2050 to achieve that.
Whatever happens in terms of the bigger global plan, we know that there's going to be less demand in some areas for the gas grid in local areas, and there might be more demand if we use it for something alternatively in different areas. So it will need to be adapted. So there will be some assets that are decommissioned effectively, and there are some that are commissioned. At the moment, what percentage of commissioning and decommissioning is put on the bill?
So there is no decommissioning at the moment, apart from assets that are replaced during our regular...
Commissioning, how much of that is paid for out of the bill?
So commissioning, the main aspects of our commissioning work is our Iron Mains replacement programme. We invest around 400 million a year in that programme, and that will run through to 2032.
That's done on a safety basis. How much of that cash has come on an annual basis from the bill, and how much has come from your investors pumping more money in?
So it's our bill per annum is about 168. Half of that is utilised for capital expenditure.
So, out of the capital expenditure, I just want to be clear because that's not quite clear. You're saying half is paid out of the bill and the other half is paid via investment, or all is paid out of the bill? Are your owners, your investors, putting cash in on an annual basis to develop this new infrastructure, or to replace the new infrastructure? Is all the infrastructure paid for out of the bill payer?
The RepEx is paid for through the bill payer. So the 50% of the bill is utilised.
So the bill payer is paying every penny for these new investments. There's no investment from your owners on this. They are effectively owning an old asset that might have been invested in years and years ago. So the bill payer is paying everything. So why should there be any profit or any return to your owners on this infrastructure? Because they have not put a penny into it.
So they've bought into our organisation.
They bought into your organisation that held old assets. They own the old assets, yes, but why should they receive any from the new assets that are being invested in?
Our assets need to have a long life. We have to maintain a safe and reliable asset going forward.
And that's what the bill payer of the other 50% pays for?
No, that aspect is for actually running our business. Mm-hmm. So that's the operational costs of maintaining a frontline operation, 24/7 call out.
Okay. Chris, I wondered what benefits do the consumer get from paying into the energy infrastructure development and the costs that go effectively on the standing charge for their bills?
So I think there's two things here. There's one, what benefits the consumers get from paying the network charges. The second thing is, should we have standing charges? We're very clear in Centrica, standing charges should be completely and utterly abolished.
Completely abolished. So it should be just a per unit charge.
Unit, yeah. So we believe the way to get consumers engaged better is to something that's simpler. So one single price in the UK, no zonal pricing at all.
Why don't you do that then?
Because at the moment, so the standing charge is £330 per year per customer. We make about £30 per customer. So it would cost us £300 per customer. That would be £2.5 billion just for 1 year to abolish the standing charge. The way that some companies have done it is they've taken the standing charge off, but they charge an inflated rate for energy. In some companies, it's the first 1 to 10 units where you pay the entire standing charge. So there's a bit of an illusion. It's only if you use nothing do you benefit. If you use a very, very small amount, you pay exactly the same.
But you have flexibility to change the way that you're charging. You could decide to get rid of the standing charge, or you could decide to only put a standing charge in once people have used X amount of energy. You could choose to do that.
So you
say your policy is that you would like to get rid of it. So why not do it?
So we believe, we would have to get permission from Ofgem in order to change that, because Ofgem set the prices. We believe that what's in consumers' interest is something that's understandable and very straightforward. We think some companies saying there's no standing charge but then having an inflated rate for the first 10, 15, 20, that doesn't simplify, that actually complicates. We think the easiest thing is abolish the standing charge, have no zonal pricing, and then have a progressive social tariff.
No zonal pricing?
No zonal prices. Single price. Why do people have to play out a postcode lottery? Single price across the UK. And then
it might be cheaper for everybody and less profitable for the companies.
It's interesting because you've got, so DESNE's got some analysis done by LPC, I think, or LCP, and Ofgem got some analysis done by FTI. The Ofgem analysis suggested that solar would move into the southeast of England, and the DESNE's analysis suggested that it would move out. It's not very simple at all to model this. So the idea that somebody can say this will be the saving if you have zonal pricing, my view is for the birds, because you can get two reports which DESNE's and Ofgem have got, and they are contradictory. I think that for consumers, it has to be, Rachel said earlier, we have to do this with consumers rather than to consumers. It has to be simple for them. And how do you explain to somebody why somebody in Inverness pays more for their electricity than somebody in London, but somebody in London pays more for the gas than somebody in Inverness?
What if they both pay less than they're currently paying, and the profits of the companies are going down? You'd be quite upset.
Well, no, because I think that what we've got to have something that's in balance. We've got to have something which allows companies to make enough profit to attract investment, and something that gives customers something that's affordable. So an energy system that reduces, what we're looking for is an energy system that keeps prices down. That's not against the interests of companies like Centrica.
Has the UK achieved that?
Sorry?
The the UK achieved that. I'm not certain it has. I'm going to move on with time.
It hasn't yet, but it could.
Mark Garney.
Can I flip this argument the other way? Right. So, Mr. O'Shea, you run a business which has a market cap of 7.1 billion. What's the profile of your shareholders?
The vast majority of our shareholders are pension funds.
So, pension funds.
Pension funds and other international energy companies.
But their shareholders are pension funds as well. Potentially, yeah. I mean, look, but dare I say it, having been an investment
we have
banker,
500,000 individual shareholders as well, a lot that bought in at the time of privatisation.
But a utility company ultimately is a boring company, and it reflects economic growth, and so therefore it appeals to pension funds as shareholders. So you in particular, Mr. O'Shea, have a responsibility to many pensioners across this country, and all of you have got to run profitable businesses. What happens when you go bust? So let's say we put too much pressure on you and actually you can't run viable businesses. Who loses the money? Is it your pension fund holders, your shareholders?
Shareholders, yeah.
So your shareholders are the last, just to clarify insolvency laws. So if you go bust, it's your shareholders that are picking up the cost of kind of, it could be bad management on your part, but it could be bad legislation on our part.
They don't get the return on their investment. They're not picking up additional costs.
The risk lies with your shareholders, isn't it?
It does absolutely. If I could make one additional point, though, but this is the reason. But this is the reason that we have called in Centrica consistently for the ring fencing of customer credit balances, because what happens if an energy retailer goes bust and they have the customer credit balances they've held, that's socialised across other energy customers. It doesn't go against the shareholders. So we believe that should be held separately.
It doesn't go to the shareholders?
No, so Ofgem run a system which socialises the consumer credit balances when they go bust. We've called consistently for these to be ring-fenced and held separate. We do that voluntarily in Centrica, but we think that must happen. Energy retailers also must hold adequate capital. At the moment, there's no capital adequacy requirements. Ofgem have brought something in from the 31st of March next year, £115 per customer. We believe it should be a multiple of that. And the reason that this should be the case is that so that if an energy company does go bust, the hit goes to the shareholders. At the moment, there's a one-way bet for undercapitalised energy companies. And that means that if it continues to grow, then some very rich individuals which own some of these businesses will get richer, and if it goes under, the consumer picks up the cost. We think that's fundamentally wrong.
I must 100% agree with you. I wasn't probably aware of that.
Can I just say that yes. I mean, there's been a huge amount of work now, which means that there are not excess credit balances being held by suppliers, and the risk that we have seen in the past, which was a tiny, less than 10% of the cost of failed suppliers, that stable door has already been bolted by Ofgem. So there's now legislation in place that absolutely limits the volume of credit balances that can be held as a proportion of your balance sheet at any time. So I do think that this concern about credit balances has now been dealt with, as has financial resilience, and we've now got a market that has ejected companies that were not financially resilient. I do want to go back to the point about standing charges. They are absolutely too high. They're an unavoidable tax that customers can't avoid, and many of them can't afford. We already don't charge the price cap standing charge. We charge below it, and that's likely to cost us £100 million off our profit this year. That is not money that is recovered through a unit rate. But we'd like to see further work on this.
I've slightly sailed on this thing because I'm trying to keep on what I want to ask questions about, not necessarily what you want to answer. But look, just coming back onto this whole insolvency piece. So you've highlighted that now if one of these smaller suppliers of deliveries goes bust, it's now being shared across the wider market, which is wrong. There's quite a toxic argument that goes on around energy suppliers, and I was asking a few months ago now, one of, I think it's different from any of you, about their credit rating and the ability for businesses to raise debt as opposed to equity. But actually equity is the same. Do you find when you compare yourselves to businesses in other countries that it's more difficult to raise capital, be it debt or equity, because of that toxic environment here? The implication given by this other person was that the credit agencies give lower credit ratings to UK businesses than they do to competitors. Have any of you found that to be the case?
So it's more expensive rather than more difficult. But the credit rating agencies have been explicit in the thresholds we have for Centrica for our investment grade credit rating are higher than other companies, and part of that explicitly is to do with being exposed to the retail market in the UK, and the belief that the rating agencies they're not comfortable with the margins that are earned and with the potential for political interference. So that's a public fact. That's something that Moody's and Standard & Poor's have said quite publicly. It does impact our credit rating, yes.
Again, do you agree with that?
I think it would be very, very difficult for a standalone retail company to get an investment grade credit rating for the reasons
in the UK compared to other countries.
I can't talk about internationally. I think this is a function of being a retailer and the volume risk and the price risk that you're exposed to, as well as the regulatory risk that Chris has alluded to. So I think that's why I think it is also very important that as Ofgem looks at financial resilience regulation, it's considering the impact of its own regulations on the cost of capital, because capital adequacy effectively means that you've got to have non-working capital tied up. Investors, not surprisingly, don't like that. So there's a
regulatory capital.
There's a very, very fine and important balance to be struck between the amount of capital that's effectively being put to one side to provide that resilience, and keeping cost of capital down.
What would be the alternative there? Because regulatory capital is usually to keep a business going in the event of poor revenues. How would you replace that?
I mean, generally we agree with the direction of travel Ofgem has taken on this, but we do think that the capital adequacy requirements that will come in next year actually are setting too high a bar, and they're treating energy suppliers as if we pose the same systemic risks to the economy as banks, which we don't.
I mean, I would say...
I'm not entirely certain I'd agree with that. I mean, there's an awful lot of businesses that need energy. It's a different type of nourishment for the business. Banks provide capital. You provide the resources which make businesses.
But the energy still flows if a company goes bust, as we saw during the crisis.
And this is
as indeed it did through the banking crisis.
If I could to build on that, it does. But the issue is that if you're so we think, I agree with Rachel. We think that Ofgem's approach is in the right direction. We think it doesn't go far enough, and we think it doesn't go fast enough. And so the idea of the capital adequacy is to make sure, so the energy will still flow. The idea of the capital adequacy is to make sure that when companies fail, it's not the consumer that picks up the cost, which they were. So consumers were paid £88 every single house, including my mum, £88 through their standing charge, because energy companies failed. When those companies did well, the money went into the pockets of the people that owned those companies. And so the capital adequacy is not to make sure the energy continues to flow. The capital adequacy is to make sure that the consumer does not pick up the cost when energy companies fail. We've been calling for this for a couple of years.
Wouldn't it be easier just to reverse the insolvency law on this, which is that the shareholders do pick up the cost of it?
But they do, but you know,
if they run out of capital,
absolutely, that's the point. So the costs are mutualised, and we think that has to stop.
Socialism comes to save the companies in the end.
Well, you cannot socialise the losses and privatise the profits.
But that's what's happening.
That's what the current regulation does. That's why we've been very, very vocal.
Socialism rescues capitalism once more.
That can't be right.
Socialism doesn't rescue capitalism. It's market
intervention.
He's told us. I mean,
please don't. I get misquoted often. Please don't misquote me on
that. We've always had a proxy of a market economy, which is based on the fact that you've got interventions. Yeah, sorry, I'm being interrupted by Mark. I doubt it was an important point you're trying to make, Mark. Does the current market system and structure incentivise lower energy bills? Chris?
So, I mean, I suppose this will sound twee, and I don't mean it to be, or glib. Higher prices incentivise lower energy bills because it encourages people to use less. So the higher the price is, and we have seen a reduction in consumption. I think that, there are some things like the eco scheme. I think we spoke about at the earlier session. We spend about 400 million a year on the eco scheme, about £10,000 a home, about 40,000 homes. But the UK's got 28 million homes. So the cheapest energy is the energy that you don't use. There are incentives there to reduce energy consumption. But the reason I think we have to have smart meters rolled out across the piece, the reason that we should have time of use tariffs and more innovation in the market, is in order to reduce that price to consumers. That's what has to happen. I think more wind, more solar, more backup gas generation, a reliable system that gives cheaper prices.
I mean, one of the so I get that, and you're trying to incentivise better use of energy. But I mean, ultimately, what about competition as a way? You know, is it better that we have more people into the market, which is what's been tried to be encouraged, or worse?
I think competition that's come in the last 3, 4, 5 years, some of it has been really good for the market. Those companies that have innovated and brought new tariffs and new products to customers, and some of the incumbent companies, we've got a lot to learn from that. There has, however, been the illusion of competition for these companies that came in, sold at a loss, and they knew it was a one-way bet. £420 deposit, that's all you need to get an energy licence. They knew it was a one-way bet. 30 of them went bust, and it cost consumers £3 billion, £88 per home. That wasn't competition. All of this, the idea of all of this switching was not competition. It was merely a gamble that paid off for some, and for those that didn't pay off for it, cost consumers a fortune.
Run out of time. Thank
Excellent.
you very much.
Thank you. So Mark Hendrick, sorry.
You wish you to.
Yeah.
Can I ask each of the panellists, how can the market be structured so that the increase in global prices can benefit the whole system, including the consumers, rather than particularly the generators and transmitters at the moment? Chris?
I think that's difficult. I mean, obviously, consumers benefit from the increase in global prices from generators by higher tax revenues. So our taxes have gone up by 400%. And so that goes into the general exchequer. So you could argue consumers benefit from that. But in reality, something that increases the wholesale price of energy is never really going to benefit the consumer of energy, because the price is going to go up. The question is how much of that increased profit goes into the exchequer and for the general good. I don't think it's possible to design a system whereby higher wholesale prices mean benefits for consumers.
You obviously can't structure the market, but how can you incentivise it that way?
You see, higher prices will incentivise lower consumption. What you tend to find is that when people figure out how to consume less, they keep that consumption lower even when the prices go down. So the spike is not good for consumers, but one of the few good things that comes out is it increases the awareness of energy efficiency.
Sorry.
I would largely agree with Chris, and as a network operator, it's not really something that we can get involved with overall, just given that we're... I would largely agree. Yeah, the higher price, yes, it does trigger people to focus, but actually we need to be looking at how do we reduce energy use overall, and educate vulnerable customers to use less. So yes, there's market considerations, but actually focusing on our customers is probably more important.
I think what we've been through over the last couple of years should have us all focusing very, very tightly on getting off gas. And that's not just in terms of improving the amount of renewable generation, the proportion of renewable generation, but it's also making sure we get customers off gas in their homes as well. And I think that it's right that there's a focus on energy efficiency, but ultimately we have situations where customers are paying nothing for electricity because that's the current value of electricity in the market at the time that they're using it. So we're seeing people saving hundreds of pounds through smart tariffs, making use of low-cost electricity when it's plentiful. And I think the more we can shift away from fossil fuels, electrify and green electrify our system, the more we can have customers actually benefiting from shifting their power out of expensive periods and making use of plentiful renewables, which otherwise we're going to have to pay to constrain off the system.
I'd agree with you, and I'd like to see us not yet gas, but I think the point is with carbon capture at the moment, people are trying to say that carbon capture is a solution to global warming and gas, but we'll leave that aside. Just finally, the risk-reward issue is something that has been discussed quite a lot today. What policies can the government introduce to move that risk-reward across the whole energy sector rather than it being focused just on perhaps one part rather than others? Chris?
Look, I think that regulation that has the consumer at the heart is very important. Regulation that makes sure, as you say, that we have responsible energy companies that have adequate capital and protect their customer balances. That's an absolute minimum. And then I think that taking a whole systems approach is very, very important to say what are we trying to do? We're trying to make sure that when people put the light switch on, electricity comes through, the lights go on. How do we get that system put together whereby you have adequate recognition of the risks and rewards, and you also have something which is as cheap as possible for consumers? That's in the interest of everybody that's in the energy sector.
I think it's absolutely important to make sure that we follow that whole systems approach, that we don't actually leave anybody behind in that energy transition.
Rachel?
I agree. Look, there are so many things that we could be doing to make the energy system much, much cheaper. We could be saving billions a year through policy choices on wholesale market reform, better access to markets for flexible demand, for example, improving the efficiency of networks. So we need to take that whole system strategic approach. In the meantime, though, we do need to be protecting customers from risk through targeted bill support. As has been discussed, there are still, although bills are coming down, there are still far too many households in this country that cannot afford their energy, and they're either racking up debt or they're going without food in order to pay their energy bills, and we need to address that.
We'd all agree with that.
Thank you indeed. Just before I turn to Therese Coffey, there's mention of customers and bills, and I'd just like a quick comment. I don't think any of you are particularly in the firing line for this, but Mr Mansbridge from Bournemouth on the south coast of England has written to us about the discussion this morning, in light of the discussion this morning, or ahead of the discussion this morning, I should say, point out that people on low incomes who live in residential homes, in retirement flats or multiple occupancy buildings have no direct relationship with their energy companies, are forced to buy energy from the owner of the park, who doesn't make a profit, but these businesses buy their energy at commercial contracts, which means when they split the invoices, some residents in care retirement flats can be charged up to 80 pence a unit when the price cap is 32 pence a unit. I would imagine that what the answer would be, but I'd just like to know, should this be something that Ofgem quickly look into, because it's a scandal?
I think there are blind spots in the regulatory protection for customers. So this is a good example of it. I mean, in most cases, I imagine those care homes as well are being treated as a business customer. They may have bought through a broker.
Retirement flats, I should be more.
Yeah.
But I've got hundreds and thousands of residents that are like this.
And they may have bought. They may have bought.
Should Ofgem look into it or not?
Yes, but I think it also involves looking at brokers that serve businesses.
From the sound of it, it sounds like Ofgem should look into it.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Therese Coffey, you briefly, quickly want to come in.
Very briefly, Rachel, you've just mentioned it. You had 10 years as a regulator of water and electricity. But can I just clarify? I think one of the issues for inner city dwellers who rely solely on electricity, they can't take advantage of your zero cost because they're not allowed to use their appliances during the times that you're selling electricity at zero. In fact, even paying people to use it then. Can you work out how you might be able to affect? Because often they are the most deprived people of all.
Yeah, and I mean, are you alluding to a situation where the tenant's electric heating is being controlled by the landlord?
Or the electricity to wash clothes, whatever. At the moment, you're pricing your electricity, so you're actually paying people to do their washing at a time when actually some of the lowest income people in the country are not allowed to. So you're actually subsidising richer people, I'm not saying rich, but richer, at the expense of then higher costs. Yeah, so when people in inner cities can't necessarily take advantage of your tariffs.
To be clear, customers that cannot flex their electricity demand are not subsidising those who do. In fact, those who can shift their energy demand are helping to keep the overall system costs down, including network costs and wholesale costs for everybody. So we would like to, and are innovating every day, to find more and more ways of helping a whole range of customers benefit from low-priced electricity, including customers, for example, that are using night storage heating, which is something that we're looking actively at right now. But no, customers are not paying more if they don't flex when others do. They should be and are benefiting overall.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Time has got the better of it. Prime Minister's questions have started. But can I thank you all? It was robust at times, but I think we can be grateful that Barry's worry about mothers has been somewhat allayed. So I hope you enjoyed it all. We certainly found it useful. Thank you again. Order.
Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.